for Christians, particularly Christians involved in engaging with other people, engaging in a pastoral context, youth workers, etc., etc. First of all, we need to remember as Christians that every human being we meet, regardless of their convictions, regardless of their behavior, regardless of their lifestyle choices, regardless of their attitude to us, is worthy of respect, care, and love precisely because they're made in the image of God. So that's a foundational point, I think, for pastoral care. Every human being is made in the image of God, and that is to shape how we treat them, regardless of what other opinions we may have about choices they have made. Secondly, it's a reminder that we must therefore relativize all other identities. So that can be done in a fairly harmless way. I'm English. I've worshipped with Americans for 20 years. It's great when I go to church and I'm not treated any differently because I'm English than the other people in the congregation. My English identity in some ways counts for nothing in the context of the church. Even though I'll always be English and I'll always have that identity, it is relativized compared to the common humanity I have with other Christian believers. In a more pointed way, though, I think it touches on how we would address individuals coming to us who have latched on to identities that perhaps run up against what we would see as central elements of the gospel. The person who's decided that they're gay and wants to pursue a gay lifestyle, or the person who is confused about their gender, the teenager who has decided that though they have the body of a girl, they're really a man, or they have the body of a boy, they're really a girl. I think we need to remember that foundationally, they're made in the image of God. And all of these other identities are to some extent constructed and to be relativized within the broader context of what I would regard as a proper biblical understanding of what it means to be a human being. When you have a good grasp of the idea that human beings are all made in the image of God, it opens the way for tolerance in some ways. That there are many identities out there in the modern world that Christians may disagree with, but they're not harming anybody in particular. We can tolerate them because these are identities being advocated or possessed by fellow human beings made in the image of God. We can relativize those identities in terms of that. Part of the problem, of course, is that tolerance is no longer enough. When you think about tolerance, tolerance means I won't act against you because of this particular thing, but I still profoundly disagree with a decision you're making or an identity to which you are laying claim. Problem in modern society is that that's not enough. People want to belong, they want to be recognized, they want to have people affirm them as who they feel they are. And so the Christian affirmation of all human beings made in the image of God is non-negotiable for us. It's absolutely essential. But we should not expect that it's going to buy us significant cultural or political space. Because the game is not about whether I will tolerate somebody's identity. The question today is about whether I will affirm, recognize, even celebrate that identity. And that's where it becomes problematic for a Christian. A Christian can affirm the common humanity that he or she shares with a gay person or a transgender person. A Christian cannot celebrate the way of life that has been chosen by people who belong to that group. And that's where the problem is going to lie, both nationally, politically for us, but also in our local communities. When you're dealing with kids in your youth group, when you're dealing with people in your church or dealing with your neighbors, it's our inability to recognize and celebrate these identities that's going to land us in trouble. The question of how we love our gay neighbors or how we love the transgender teen, given Christian convictions, is a tricky one. Obviously, every situation has its unique points, so it's very difficult to produce a one-size-fits-all response to this. But I would say a couple of things need to be borne in mind. One, there are certain things that Christians can simply not give ground upon. Sexual behavior is one of them. The created distinction between men and women is another. These are two things that that we have to get right and have to be foundational to whatever pastoral strategy we then employ. We have to be kind and loving with those who are struggling with these things, but we have to do that against the background of the truth. It is not kind and loving to compromise the truth. That can only lead to disaster. So first of all, we have to be clear on biblical sexual mores, biblical notions of identity, biblical notions of the importance of biological sex. Having said that, I think we then need to understand a couple of things in our strategy. One, everybody wants to flourish. Everybody wants to do well. And so as we address the individuals who are struggling with these particular issues, one strategy is to ask the Socratic question. Does this lifestyle choice that you're making, does it lead to flourishing? And then, for example, we can go to some hard scientific data. On the transgender question, for example, suicide rates are catastrophically high even for those who've transitioned. To which the response might be, yes, well, that's because society still isn't affirming of those who've transitioned. Well, this is where a country like Sweden becomes interesting, because Sweden is incredibly affirming of trans people, and yet the suicide rates for those who've transitioned is pretty much the same. So one strategy can be, okay, all human beings want to flourish. I want you to flourish. I want you to be who you really are. I want you to be who God wants you to be. Now let's see how your conviction of who you are connects to evidence for what actually constitutes human flourishing. I was recently chatting to a youth worker who was telling me that in his local school district, 80% of the young girls there now identify as lesbian or bisexual. And we're talking middle school kids here. We're not talking 17, 18, 19-year-olds. We're talking 11, 12, 13-year-olds. 80% of them identify as lesbian or bisexual. Question is, has this always been the case? Have we always had this vast number of lesbian, gay, bisexual people who've just had to stay under the radar because they would get into trouble if they came out? I suspect the answer is no. What we're actually seeing now is the unfortunate harvest that comes from denying children an understanding of friendship that isn't at core profoundly sexual. 30, 40 years ago, kids had friendships. I had friendships when I was at school. I had friendships with other guys, sometimes powerful friendships, pungent friendships, but I never conceptualized them in a sexual way because I had this category of friendship that allowed me to understand how I might relate to another human being without it being at core a sexual relationship or a sexual desire. I think what we've done in modern society is we've forgotten friendship. We now sexualize our kids so early in school. We're teaching them sex education from kindergarten. We've so sexualized the world for our kids that they are incapable of understanding friendship, desire, companionship in any way that doesn't track back to some kind of sexual identity. And what we need to do, what the church needs to do, what youth leaders need to do, what parents need to do, is help their children understand friendship in the traditional sense of the word. We can do that by teaching. We can also do that by the environments we create and the examples we set. And that's where groups like Awana can really come in and help, because they can provide kids context where they can learn to be friends. They can learn this concept of friendship that I think has been debased, if not abandoned, in our society.